So let us pick up the stones over which we stumble, friends and billholders. Let us listen to the sound of breath in our bodies. Let us listen to the sound of our own voices, of our own names, of our own fears. Let's claw ourselves out of the graves we've dug. Let's lick the earth from our fingers. Let us look up and out and around. The world is big and wide and wild and wonderful and wicked, and our lives are murky, magnificent, malleable, and full of meaning. Let us pray. I just wanted to introduce our three speakers and let them take it from here. So Dr. Lucy McBride is a native Washingtonian. She attended the National Cathedral School, Princeton, and Harvard Medical School, where she graduated with honors. She was a 1996 Fulbright Scholar at the University of Cambridge, where she earned an master's degree in oncology. She completed her internship and residency in internal medicine at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. She spent several years in the emergency medicine faculty. Dr. McBride practices general internal medicine and is a member of the clinical staff at Sibley Hospital. She's board certified in internal medicine. She lives in the District of Columbia with her husband and 3 children. She's a trusted and recognized voice in patient care. She's also a healthcare educator, mental health advocate, and author of a popular newsletter and podcast to increase awareness of the inseparability of mental and physical health. Stacy Murphy is a licensed psychotherapist and has been serving clients in the District of Columbia and Virginia for the last 17 years. She completed her master's degree in counseling at Loyola University in Maryland. Stacy has completed several advanced certificates and accreditations. She's a certified EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing practitioner, and has an accreditation and certification as an ICEFT, emotionally focused therapist. Stacy has studied Enneagrams extensively and uses them in both individual and couples therapy. She was a business writer and for a counseling career, and she continues to write about counseling couples, coping with family stress, conflict resolution, autism, and families. She lives in DC with her husband and 2 children. Meghan Jarvis is an author, podcast host, TEDx speaker, and psychotherapist specializing in trauma, grief, and loss. After experiencing PTSD following the deaths of both parents within 2 years of each other, Meghan began speaking on a larger scale about the importance of understanding grief and supporting grievers. Founder of Attacking Point Partners, Meghan and her team consult regularly with companies addressing grief in the workplace. Meghan's Grief is My Side Hustle platform includes her popular podcast of the same name, her blog, and her free grief writing workshop, Grief Meets. Meghan's memoir, The End of the Hour, was published by Z Books in December 2023. And I learned tonight that Meghan is the mother of 3 children. So welcome and thank you. So who wants to kick off? I think you do. Me? You did. Okay, so I'll start. Okay, so hi, I'm so glad to be here, and also I really love an intimate setting like this. Because I think we can make this interactive, and I hope that this is more of a conversation than a lecture. In fact, I hope that my practice of medicine is the opposite of a sermon and a lecture. In fact, I think one of the problems with our medical system is that we sort of treat patients as this, patients know a lot more than they give them credit for. Okay, so thank you for being here. My name is Lucy McBride. I'm a mother of 3. I'm a primary care doctor. I've always been interested in the human experience of illness as much as the illness itself. I was that medical student who relished the moment in our first year of medical school where they hired actors in Boston to sit as patients, and we had to practice developing a rapport and then delivering bad news. Like, I'm so sorry, Mr. Smith, you have prostate cancer. And I was like, yes, this is my Super Bowl. I love that human interaction, the building of the trust, and I didn't love that the person had prostate cancer, but I liked the kind of the ability to be that trusted guide through a hard time in someone's life. And guess what? We all experience hard times. Fast forward to 17 years of practicing medicine and always loving thinking about patients as more than the sum total of their cholesterol and their weight, thinking about patients as a living, breathing, moving organism in the 364 days in a year that they're not in my office. And COVID hits like a fireball, March 2020.
And I think what COVID taught us, to fast forward to today, is that mental health is relevant to our physical health. That we all have mental health. That it's not an option that you can take, it's not a feature of the human condition that you can opt out of. Like when you pick a new car, that you have like automatic windows or doors. You can't have the human body and the human condition without mental health. And I think what we learned in COVID is that we all have mental health. We all experience anxiety. We all have fears. We have worries. We all have behaviors that are healthy. We all have behaviors that are not so healthy. We have relationships. Sometimes relationships that are fragile. Sometimes relationships that are not authentic. We have narratives and stories that we tell ourselves that often are rooted in childhood. And those narratives inform how we think, how we feel, and then how we behave. And that is my job. It's not just to check people's cholesterol and their weight and say, you know, eat a little better, act a little more, see you next year. It's to help people understand that they are the sum total of different components and that their stories live in their bodies. And that we can look at what happened during COVID, because everyone here, everyone who I see as a patient, I included, have a story. I have my COVID story, I have my life story, I have the stories that I have told myself that are actually true about who I am, about my vulnerabilities. I have stories that are true and that are painful. And my health, just like your health, just like my patient's health, it shows up in blood, but it also shows up in how we relate to other people, how we relate to alcohol, how we relate to food, how we move our bodies, what we decide to do, how we manage stress. And I think COVID sort of laid bare, not just that we have mental health, but how relevant it is to our everyday physical health and well-being. So I've been writing this newsletter since March 2020. It began the panicked spring when no one knew what to do. I started writing furiously. This was my way of coping with uncertainty and stress. And I started writing, and now it's been 3 years and it's reaching 23,000 people a week. I've gotten to write for The Atlantic. I've now written a book with Simon & Schuster. And I'm not trying to make this about me. What I'm trying to make it about is that there is such an appetite for people to feel seen and heard by the medical profession. I think we live in a landscape, unfortunately, in the United States, where medicine and the medical industrial complex is over here, and it's failing people. 80 million Americans in this country don't have a primary care doctor, and if they're lucky to have a primary care doctor, the doctor doesn't answer the phone. If they answer the phone, they get handed off to someone else. If they get into the office, they get maybe 5 minutes, and they get treated like a bag of organs or a set of boxes to check, and you're on your way. Then you have the wellness industry, which is well-intended in many ways, but it's ultimately capitalizing on the failures of modern medicine. The wellness industry says, aha, doctors aren't listening, doctors aren't glued to their electronic medical record. Doctors can't possibly have the time, through no fault of their own, to address the invisible parts of the human condition that are no less important to your health than the things we can measure in your blood. Stress, sleep, mood, relationship to food, alcohol, how we organize our day, how we organize our thoughts. So the wellness industry is saying, hey, take this supplement, sign up for this class, you know, and fine, I believe in yoga, I believe in candles, I believe in baths, but the problem is those things are important, but they're not sufficient for our health. Nor is just checking our cholesterol. So what I'm trying to say to my patients, and to anyone who will listen, is that health is about a process. It's not about a blood test. It's not about winning your appointment at your annual physical. I had a patient come in just this week who was putting off her appointment with me, putting it off for weeks and weeks and weeks, and she finally came in and admitted she'd been putting it off because she's like, I wanted to lose the 10 pounds before I came in. And I reminded her, as I remind all of my patients, I get that literally every day, that this is not a contest, there's no grade, that health is a process, it's not an outcome. And as I think about health, I think about it literally as a laddering up of self-awareness. So if we can look at our interiority, look at our stories we tell ourselves, think deeply about how we organize, the way we eat, the way we sleep, the way we relate to other people, the way we manage stress, and really challenge the narrative that we tell ourselves and make sure that the stories we tell ourselves are rooted in fact. Self-awareness is the lobby of the building, right? We have to start there. And then laddering up to acceptance of the things we cannot control. Here comes the serenity prayer. So accepting the things we cannot control, from I have a genetic predisposition towards breast cancer, or I have a mother who is, not so nice and has informed the narratives I tell myself that makes me overeat, to agency. So if you think about health, it's not an outcome, it's a process. Self-awareness, which is life's work, to acceptance of the things we cannot control. Too many people spend energy trying to control the things they cannot control, instead leaning into things where they have agency. Let me give you an example, and then I'll let these other wonderful women talk. So this is just a common phenomenon that happens like every day during the pandemic. I'd have someone come in, and they, you say, hello, how are you? I'm doing fine. How are you actually? Are you okay? This is the title of my newsletter. And then the tears. I'm not sleeping. I'm drinking too much at night, not because I'm an alcoholic or because there's any label we need to put on it, but because I'm just undone. And then I'm exhausted in the morning. I drink a lot of coffee. I can't get to the gym because the gym's closed. I don't have time. I'm managing my kids. I'm managing my aging parents. I feel like I'm spreading myself too thin. And then I go home and I do it all over again. And I don't feel like I have control. So how can I help this patient? It's certainly not to tell this patient, exercise more, eat less, stop drinking, see you next year. That is not the message. The message is, let's find out where we can carve out agency in this situation. Let's figure out what the narratives are. Like, what are the stories you are telling yourself? And some of the time the stories are, I'm not good enough, and sometimes the stories are real. Like, I have a mother who has Alzheimer's, I have a child who's depressed, and I just don't have time to take care of myself. Even then, though, there are places where we can find acceptance of unpleasant realities and spend less time ruminating over them, and we can lean into agency. Little things like carving out 5 minutes before this woman went to bed. I said, get a yoga mat. She had abandoned yoga. Get a yoga mat, put it by your bed. Do 5 minutes of stretching, 5 minutes of writing down your thoughts so they're not percolating in your brain all night long. And, easier said than done, but really try, 2 weeks without alcohol. 2 weeks without alcohol, and let's talk about it in 2 weeks. It's not a test. If you drank every night when you're talking again, that's fine too, but let's just try. So little baby steps. Journaling, stretching, cut the alcohol, turns out you're sleeping better, less caffeine, less agitation at work, palms sweating, heart racing, less alcohol. It's just little. So that is what health is to me. Obviously, I prescribe Lipitor. Obviously, I recommend colonoscopies. Obviously, I have an arsenal of specialists I send people to. I manage diabetes. I manage patients with dementia. My point is that we are more than a set of organs. We are more than a set of diagnoses. And that the doctor-patient relationship isn't about lecturing or saying, school, don't do that. It's about acknowledging the inevitable risks that we face, recognizing that harms and risks are everywhere. Turns out that there's an occupational hazard of being human. We experience loss, we experience relationship stress. Mental health is not defined as being happy or being content all the time. Mental health is, in my mind, it's about, does your mood and emotional experience map onto the circumstances, and do you have the tools to manage the inevitable bumps on the road? So when you have agency, when you have a sense of control, where you can say, there's my thought pattern saying I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, or my mom never loved me and I'm angry. Where can we put that narrative? How can we fact check it? How can we turn the narrative towards, you know what? I am lovable, I am doing the best I can, and I'm going to take control of this habit because I'm self-sabotaging my health, and I know it, and that makes me feel bad. And then the ship turns away from the iceberg and people feel better. Things do not always end up happy. I deliver a lot of bad news. People don't always, rise from the ashes, but I do think that a lot of health kind of lies in our own sort of self-awareness, and that we don't need necessarily expensive potions and lotions, gym membership and leggings to find a bit of control over things that we need to control. The leggings and the lotions and the potions, and bring them all, like, I love them. It's both and. I guess my point is that I think my message to you is think about in your life to build your own house of health. Like, what are the narratives on the ground level of the house? What are the narratives that you tell yourself that drive a lot of your thoughts and behaviors? Think about the behaviors you want to change. Think and walk it back. Think about the narratives that are driving those behaviors that you know are not healthy for you. We all have them. If you don't, you're lying. And walk it back to what is the narrative that is, what is the gap between the intention of changing a habit and the execution of it. Minding the gap between your best intentions, whether it's cutting back on work, spending more time with your kids, drinking less alcohol, eating less sugar, whatever it is, and the execution. There's some gap, and that's the thing we have to mine with these two guys. Because when you can mine that space and mind the gap without judgment and without shame and with a sense of compassion, then that's where the action is, and that's where I can help people the most. So when you're thinking about how to be healthier in your life, it's not necessarily about taking your medicine, your vitamins, and supplements and everything. It's really about challenging internal narratives and carving out agency where you can. And I'm happy to answer specific questions about COVID, boosters, any specific questions you have.
I'm going to go next.
Go.
And then I'm going to introduce you. Meghan and I have been friends for 20 years. We did our first couples therapy training together, and I think we really have grown up together in the mental health field. But something that you said really brought on a new concept of that I wanted to share with everybody, that I honestly think there is a silver lining to the pandemic, in that we're all finally talking about mental health. We're all finally making room for it. We're acknowledging it. And up until that point, I think a lot of us looked at lotions and potions, right? Like, the right smoothie recipe will save us. We will be okay if we have self-care that looks a certain way. A lot of us during the pandemic did a walk every day and did yoga every day, and we were still depressed and isolated and lonely and sad. And the rates of depression and anxiety have skyrocketed. I think all of us have read the statistics. There was a new report that came out in March about kids that is disturbing and painful, and that was just based on data from 2021. We don't even know what's really happening now. We're going to learn more in a couple of years. But for me, the good news is we are going to finally stop telling women in particular, if you do this yoga routine, you're going to feel better. You actually need to figure out what are the patterns that brought this thought process to where we are. And the pandemic really gave us all a gift in that everyone had a similar experience of trauma and loss. I work with couples, I work with individuals on trauma and relational issues. I think in Washington, things have been pretty rough in Washington since 2015. What did you say? And it's also a therapist. 2015 was when the tide turned, and today I decided to count how many inquiries were on one of the 5 listservs for therapists that I read emails for. I went through one of them, and there were 32 requests for therapist recommendations. And that is another point I want to make with everybody who's here. It's really hard to find somebody to talk to. If you decide you want to, please come talk to me and I will help you find somebody. You won't have to make cold calls and have that person not return your call. That's what has happened. Therapists are stressed, therapists are overworked. We're getting a lot more calls than we were used to, and then we're not calling people back. And it's because it's a hard conversation to have. It's the first time
They're not called people back.
fair, right? And when I hear that, it breaks my heart that people are unable, but I also know these are wonderful humans who are just unable to make the call. So please, use us if you need anything. It's really hard to make connections to people who can give us help just by looking through psychology today. So that would be my point. Meghan, on the other hand, has really transformed her work in the pandemic, recognized a really important need for all of us to accept that grief and loss is actually real and happens to everyone, and we're all facing it. And she has done some transforming work to help people like me and therapists talk about it in a different way. And I am just so grateful that she was willing to come and join us up here.
This is such an honor to sit with these 2 women, so I just want to say that I am one of your 23,000, and I'm responsible for about 1,000.
You are. That's
You
all.
are. I really am. It's not. I experienced PTSD in 2019 after my mom died. I was with her body, and for those of you that don't know what PTSD is, it is sort of what it sounds, which is images and thoughts that relentlessly go through your mind that pull your five senses experience back to the moment of the terrible thing that happened. And so even though I have all the master's degrees and have been working in the field for 20 years, and I have to tell you, it's pretty bitter, because I was like, how did I not get to circumnavigate? How did this not insulate me? But it was, transformative to experience and embody something that I spent a lot of time treating. And I think like Lucy, because what I needed at the end of the day, which is when I got here, was often videos too, which I just
Still like videos.
We were like announcing in the cathedral, and so was I. I was like, where is she? But a lot of what I just heard was like a steady hand around, yes, this is actually happening, and it is as hard as you think it is, and sort of the hope that's offered stubbornly, which is we can get through this, we may not know how yet. And I think from my perspective, my rocking back and forth that night had to do with just the amount of loss and how little, we didn't start training extra therapists, we didn't give people tuition breaks, we didn't ask, primary care doctors if they wanted to come be trained in what we know. And my work for 20 years was sort of trauma in general. So whether you were mugged on the street, or you were in an earthquake, or what we call sort of more developmental trauma, which is maybe you were not perfectly matched with parents who met your emotional needs in a regular way. I worked with people to sort of help move that energy so that it's not stuck inside their bodies. And so it doesn't become those defining thoughts about how life has to be lived. What's interesting, in trauma work, you are always talking about an event that happened. It may be that you're in the middle of a divorce, but that divorce is based on things that have already happened. COVID was not that. COVID was, we are building the bricks in front of us while the storm is here. And for a lot of people, what they experienced was a sense of overwhelm. And we use in trauma work this concept of a window of tolerance. And it's what it sounds like. When you are in this little window, you're doing fine. But if you get up too high, and that looks like anxiety, or down too low, and that sort of looks like depression, it's more complicated than that, but generally speaking, you get in trouble. And there just wasn't anybody that wasn't, at some point during the day, during COVID, in trouble, right? I mean, it was more than we knew what to handle, how to handle. And the piece for grief and loss, to me, was we lost 1 million Americans, and the estimate is that leaves 9 million people grieving. And the percentage of children who actually lost both parents is completely, it's just a stunning and staggering number that's been underreported. So when you're looking at the horizon, it's what we know. We don't like to talk about grief and loss. We'd like you to do that on your therapy hour. There are no therapists available. But grief is not a mental health problem. It's just like a developmental experience. It's not a problem that we have to solve. It's an experience that we need to go through and have the support that we need. And there's some statistics out there that say, most people, so 83% of people say they have enough support when there's grief and loss. But here's what I know. People don't know what is inside their system that is lingering there from their father's death 6 years ago. And so when you go and you get the qualitative research and say, could you have used more support when your dad died? And the person says, no, that's fine. I cried, I read his books, we had the eulogy, it was okay. What they're not aware of, because we don't educate the culture, is like, oh, that's when the tension in the marriage started. That's when the self-loathing around your body started. That's when you stopped exercising, that's when you stopped singing. And the number of people that come into my office and say, it's been about 18 months. And then I just ask the question, what happened 18 months ago? I don't think anything. Okay, no significant events, no deaths, no, oh, well, you know, actually my uncle, I was really close to him, he died, but I don't think it's related. You know, the way that feelings work, first they start as emotions. They're these little electrical currents that move through your body that are unconscious. They become feelings when we are conscious of them. And the way we become conscious of them is we name them. And our ability to name our emotions and transform them into feelings is really bad. So a lot of what I do right now is go into spaces, workspaces, you know, all these companies that are like going back to work. You know what does not happen after tremendous loss? You don't go back anywhere. There's no back to go to. And grievers know that. Grievers know that like you are never going back to the moment before your mom died. You're just not. So now you're building the bricks underneath you as you're trying to move forward. And what really happened for me was I had taken a corporate retreat. I had taken some C-suite folks up to Cropalo in Western Mass to get them to sort of name their non-death loss. So they were confused. Everybody was having a lot of emotion at this one company. And, you know, I said, well, it sounds like grief. And, you know, they were like, but nobody died. And I was like, right, but you had these offices that you loved and these teams that you built. You lost 50% of your work, you know, your workforce. You lost most of your income. You're going to have to build back. You're not sure how to do that. None of your materials are being shipped in from the, like, I mean, I had a pen and I was like, what else did you lose? What else did you lose? I mean, they were amazing, and by the time we got to the end, the guy was like, I really liked the carpet in the old office space. You know, they were into it. They were ready to name all the things. So coming back from this retreat where these, you know, these people had really come to understand that there is feeling associated with loss. Grief is the energy that is created inside your body in relationship to loss. And I turned on Brene Brown. Do you guys know Brene Brown? She's like my goddess. So here's Brene. She has two different podcasts. One is sort of like about people and another is sort of about business. So I've got the business podcast on. And they have these very smart men. It's actually a father and son team, Soul and Soul. And they have done a report. And they're going to tell us why the Great Resignation is happening. And I can't wait. I get like a coffee, I gas up my car, I'm going to drive home listening to them talking about grief. It's going to be amazing. Because how could they not? 9 million people grieving is the estimate. 21 million people have left the workplace in this period of time. And so what Soul and Soul did, imperfect research, but this is what we have, they went to Glassdoor and they looked at the responses that people gave about why they left their jobs. So if you go on to Glassdoor, it doesn't say grieving. So we're imperfect data. Also, people would not, I haven't met a single person that has said, I left my job because I was grieving. They collect the data, and here's what they tell us. An hour and 9 minutes this podcast was. People are leaving the workplace because it has become toxic. Now keep in mind, no one has been in a workplace during this period of time. No one has been in a workplace. Now the FDA did have a rat infestation during this time, so they actually did become toxic. But it's not like someone left a bag of potatoes and now we have, you know, methane gas. And all these three very smart people with all the degrees, they go an hour and 9 minutes and no one says, do you think it could be people are grieving? They do not say the words loss or death or grief a single time in the hour and 9 minutes. And I pulled my car over and I cried like I had just hit a dog. Because I thought, if Brene Brown can't do this for us, if she can't name it, we're doomed. And then I went home and I rocked back and forth at night, like, what are we gonna do about this? And that became really like the left turn where I was like, all right, I'm gonna start writing about this, I'm gonna start screaming about this, I'm gonna start yelling about this. And the thing that I can tell you that's hopeful is that people do care. Like, I've given 2 TED Talks on this now. I was just saying to Lucy, like, my inbox is flooded with all the people, all the chief people officers that read an article that I wrote in MIT Sloan and Harvard Business Review, and they are like, wait a minute, what do you mean? We need to hear more. And that is really hopeful to me. Because while grief and loss is not a mental health problem, it's just a developmental thing. And I say this a lot. My kids are 15, 13, and 11, and every single one of them had to take that torturous class about puberty, right? I mean, they came home and they're like, please get me out of it. I'm like, no, I'm not going to get you out of it because you need the information. You need to know what's going to go on in your body. And we grieve with our bodies. Same story. I could teach that class right now. I could tell you what to expect when you go through a trauma. But interestingly, the field of trauma kind of throws grief and loss in there with all the stuff. But really, trauma means loss, that you experienced a chaotic form of loss that imprinted something negative inside your system. And what I'm trying to do is say, when that loss happens, how do we prevent it from leaving only a negative imprint in our system? And I really believe that education, just like the health class, is at the root of it. People come into my office and they're like, I think I'm crazy, I'm going crazy. I can't remember the day my dad died, I can't remember my uncle's name. And I'm like, no, that's just brain fog. Let me tell you what's going on. Let me explain to you why it's there. And also, let me tell you why it's adaptive. Your body is amazing. It's trying not to code these terrible memories, these terrible moments of this day. It's trying to protect you. It's also dysfunctional, but it's trying. So, I teach people some real basic neuroscience, and then they go teach people some real basic neuroscience. I mean, poor Stacy, we meet on Mondays, and I'm like, let me tell you this other thing. Just like, we know. But that's how passionate I feel about it, because what does happen with unresolved grief is it stays inside the body, like a splinter, and then we start drinking, and then we start eating, and then we start fighting, and then we start quitting our damn jobs. And the feelings that I can't name and I don't understand because nobody talks about them and we don't name them very well, and they're not usually done well on television. I don't know them, I can't convey them, and so I tell my boss I'm leaving because I feel disrespected. I have this great example of a woman that I worked with that I call Alice, and her mother died during COVID. She actually worked for HR for a big company. And I mean, she loved her boss. They'd been together forever. He was so kind to her when her mother died. He, take all the time you need, do everything. We are here for you. And they sent food, they sent gift cards. I mean, they were super generous. But she worked for HR, she came back. When she knew she needed to come back, they had 5 days as a bereavement policy, which is pretty generous. And when she came back, she had like 2,000 emails. And she had missed some really important deadline because nobody had managed her work. And she was digging out of that for 6 months. And her language in my office started to be, well, he really only cares about the company. This man that she was, they were devoted to each other. They had kind of built this company together. And he felt like, I did so much for you. Why are you mad? And she left. I mean, even with me as her therapist, she left. Because she couldn't get those feelings that she needed validated. And he was devastated and she was devastated. And now she's at another workplace. And in that workplace, there's a lot of pain around the fact that nobody knew her before her mother died. And nobody ever asks her, how is she doing? And Mother's Day is coming up and they don't know to wonder if that's going to be a painful time for her. So I'll stop talking, but that's the heart of the work that I'm doing right now. And I am hopeful about it. I'm hopeful that, it falls into the field of mental health. You may be interested. I am interested that the person I end up talking to when I go into companies is always the person who does DEI work. Like that's every time. When it happened the first time, I was like, oh, well, she must be the person who does training, but now it's happened 17 times. So I'm not sure what that means, but it's inclusive or diverse to bring her, I'm not sure. But I do find it really hopeful that maybe I believe in capitalism a lot. And I think if we are educating people anywhere, we're going to benefit from it. And I would really hope, in the next 5 years, we would create some policies that would allow therapists to get degrees fast and cheaply, and that we could offer mental health services because, a lot of us burned out during this time as well.
Questions? I love questions. Yeah, please.
I'll jump in, because you said something that resonated with me when we
Yeah.
were all talking. I think we might not name it in the country, but when we do name it, we have very little tolerance for it lasting. Oh, aren't you over that yet?
That's right.
My husband still has cancer. I'm sorry, are you still grieving?
Yeah.
Right? And so I think even when we can name it, as a culture, we have that Horatio Alger myth, right? That we can all pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and get over it. And so I think in addition to naming it as a culture, we also need to accept it and we need to pay for it.
100%.
Right? Because you guys talked about it, but if you can find a therapist, they will not take your insurance.
That's right.
That's right.
And I'll just share one more thing. When you talked about your client, right?
Yeah.
Who had to come back after 5 days, because the most painful thing about our policies is that when my husband died and I called HR and I said, okay, he's dead, I'm going to take about this much time, the first thing the HR woman said to me after I'm sorry is, just so you know, your FMLA is over. It only covered when your husband is dying. So you have no more leave. Like, as a culture,
Yeah.
we don't support
That's right.
grief or the natural outcome of grief. And until those policies change, until we pay for therapists, train them and stuff, but we have to support it as a culture.
Amen, hallelujah, make it double. I completely agree. I think it's in medicine as well, which is part of the reason I think we don't talk about grief and death and dying and sorrow and suffering is because, doctors in the medical industrial complex don't give space for that. Like, invisible suffering isn't counted as part of your health. Like, mental health is considered sort of a luxury item, it's kind of a stepchild of traditional health. If you're lucky, you have a therapist, that's sort of like gravy, but, health is really cholesterol, blood pressure, weight, blood sugar, like how much you drink, how much you smoke. I think our entire culture doesn't count as invisible suffering well at all, but I think it's uncomfortable, it's ugly, people don't have a vocabulary to think about feelings, they can't name their feelings, then people don't have a vocabulary to use to say to someone else, like people don't know what to say.
Yeah, they don't.
They don't know what to say, so we need an education, we need, first of all, I have lots of thoughts, we need medicine we need doctors who are trained to talk to patients, to listen, to elicit their story, and to count their grief and insomnia equally as important as their how much red meat they eat or how many glasses of wine they eat. We need more people to go into primary care. We need medicine to, instead of incentivizing doctors to prescribe, refer, and test, because there is no blood test for grief, there is no blood test for depression, there is no, how grieving are you? And like if you're 8, then you're like, oh, I'm really sorry. And if you're 6, you're like, oh, well, sorry. There's no blood test. So when you can't see it, it doesn't exist. So we need doctors to be incentivized to listen, to establish a relationship and a rapport, and then we need unfettered access to mental health and behavioral health services. Not because you're mentally ill, because you're human. I literally say that, a couple times a week when I refer someone to counseling, because they're fighting with their husband that they love dearly, they're not having sex, there's something's going on, they're thinking about quitting their job, they haven't named the grief, the loss that's driving this urge to just gone away. And I can recommend therapy, and they'll inevitably say, well, my insurance doesn't cover it, you know, how am I gonna leave my work for an hour a week, or, you know, that's just sort of a luxury. And I'm like, well, this is a classic one. What would I talk about anyway? They spent an hour talking to me about their mother and their grief, and I'm like, well, what would I talk about? I'm like, that. But we need unfettered access to mental health services. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. And I do think one of the benefits of going through the last 3 years of a collective trauma is that mental health is having a moment. People are recognizing that mental health is relevant. You know, the Surgeon General talking about the epidemic of loneliness. I'm kind of like, where were you during like spring of 2020, but whatever. But I think it is having a moment. I think we need like bereavement leave, we need vocabulary. In my exam room in my office, I have a huge poster that you have to look at when you're sitting there on the deli paper waiting for me. You really have to specialize in making people wait. And it's a periodic table of emotions. So you know, we're taught that, you're socialized to believe that emotions are like happy, mad, sad. You know, the primary colors. And it's like jealousy, envy, like rage, you know, it's all these emotions. My kids, I have a mini version at home, my kids tease me about it, did tease me about it. Now I find them bringing their friends and their girlfriends over and like mapping out their emotions. And the point is, yes, we need to be able to talk about these things. We need to countenance invisible suffering. We need to hand people the language to say, instead of saying your FMLA is up, to say like, I'm so sorry. Sit in my office, we'll talk a minute. I mean, just, what happens like compassion and kindness?
Policies.
What's that?
You have policies.
You have policies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm going to say I'm really sorry about your husband's death. You know, that's an embodied kind of understanding of where we fail, right? You have that, and your comments, where they land inside me. First of all, I apologize if anyone is in HR, but considering what HR is and what they are instructed to do, I am stunned by what I hear in my office. I'm confused about what HR thinks their job is, if not to show up compassionately for people. And the comment that you are giving right now, I mean, that is not uncommon and so part of the trainings is about like, one of the questions I ask is, do you want people to be afraid that their FMLA is running out? Like, is that what you want them, or do you want them to try to come to work even though they can barely get up and like maybe do an hour? Would you like that from them? Because you actually can co-create that. And what I always hear is like the Meghan, if we start talking about feelings, how will we not become a mental health clinic in here? Well, we won't get any work done. And I really appreciate the fear behind that. But it is not difficult, like with this HR person. What I would say is, what do you imagine? You sit there, you call me and tell me that you're trying to come back to work after your husband died. Just sit and you do that. And I'm going to play you. And you tell me how that is. It's not that there aren't, of course there are policies. But do they want you to be able to come in and be a whole human at work or not? And I think we culturally do not, we see grieving as failure. We see death as failure. We see illness as failure. And people think at work we're supposed to win and succeed. And they don't put it in there.
And I appreciate that. Again, I don't want to take up more time. My issue isn't with what she said versus with what she said. My issue is that we don't have bereavement
Of course.
5 days.
Yeah.
What I was reacting to is what you said about climate, right? In that, great, FMLA is great, but we as a culture need to take it to the next level.
And I am really hopeful that we're going to, because everyone has experienced a traumatic trauma experience in the last 3 years. And maybe I'm just a little too Mary Sunshine about it, but I think that we're having more conversations, which is what leads to eventual policy change and more normalization of talking about emotions, because our culture doesn't give us a lot of room for that, and it gives us this myth that you just let it go. And how many times I've talked about just letting it go.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So one of the themes in my office in the pandemic was, I want to call it like the fragile alliance theme, where people recognize that their marriage was sort of scotch taped together. Maybe they realized their friendships were like superficial and rooted in like parties, and that wasn't really what they liked doing, and they actually were introverted and like reading, and they didn't like that group anyway. Fragile alliances with, you know what I mean? I'm like, am I talking about myself? No. Fragile alliances with work, like, you know, you realize that maybe this wasn't the job I was meant to have. Like, so I'm wondering if in your office, this is a question, did you see people sort of, and I'm sure you did, but like, did you see like marriages dissolving and for like that might, like, did they hit fast forward on things that would have happened anyway? Did you see people recognize their fragility and getting better? Or like, what was going on in your office with relationships?
So it's a really good question. I'm a small subset of data, but I do think it accelerated old fissures for sure, but people were stuck and kind of frozen in time. So what we had was a lot of delayed reaching out for help. And when they finally did make the call, the pressure was on. There was a lot more expectation that there would be massive change in a very quick turnaround. Because the issue with couples is, you know, we have an attachment relationship. You're connected to a person who is supposed to make you feel safe and loved and connected, and then you can go off into the world and be a better version of yourself. And when you are both experiencing trauma, both experiencing constant threat, it primes the attachment system to need each other, but also not to be able to be there for each other. So what happens in attachment with babies when they're ignored, when a need is expressed and it goes unmet? Despair. What else would you describe the last 3 years as being despair? That's a collective experience of that. So my couples that have come into my office have been probably at beyond the point where they typically would have reached out for help because they couldn't even fathom making room in a schedule in a day to do a Zoom or to come down to the office or to get childcare or any of that. And it really, I don't think it's not, I think anybody who shows up in my office, I just trust that they want to be together because it's a big effort to come in and to be with a stranger and to share your interior world. So I would never say this relationship is beyond repair, but a big piece of the work has been on psychoeducation about how this experience changes your body, this experience changes how you turn toward each other. We can't really talk so much about content. This is really about processing and helping couples connect with each other in a new way. And it's been harder to do, I would say. I've had more couples at crisis consistently than I've ever had in 20 years. And I guess that's an easy thing to say based on what we've been.
And then my corollary question is, I think I know the answer, but, you know, the mental health toll on young people during the pandemic, I mean, it's like a moral crime. Like, obviously we didn't know what was happening in 2020, but, and I won't go into like commentary about that, but just, did you find that there was a lot of stress about kids and that caused, was that a common theme? Like, yeah.
And just difference of opinion about how we should manage this and trying to have control, one partner thinking it should be one way, the other one thinking, we never cared about this before, well, just because you're home now, why do you get to have an opinion about it? And what ended up happening was kids just turned more toward screens and social media, and we know that the research is crystal clear.
Yeah.
The correlation between depression and anxiety and screen use is really, really clear. And so we've got a crisis because of that. Kids going into social media, going into that world and really feeling less than, embarrassed, the bullying, all of those things just coming online in a real stark way. And parents are panicked. I mean, I'm panicked. I have 2 kids. I'm worried about it too. It's really challenging, but at the end of the day, the real work, it's attachment work. It's being close with your kids, it's looking them in the eye. It's how did Stan teach us? A curious face. Even we did a training with Stan Tack, and
look with consideration.
Be curious, lean toward, don't judge. It's hard when you're that worried about your kids.
There's a lot of helplessness too, and I think that's we're primed to understand the world based on how we previously experienced it. That's actually how the brain works, is it codes information. And when you have novelty, it's like energetically expensive, but it activates your primitive brain to be afraid. And, you know, the pandemic, my kids all the time, you know, the idea that like churches were closed and schools were closed and museums were closed would like blow my mind when I was driving to the grocery store. And I just wasn't sure how that, I still am not sure how that's going to imprint. But one thing that I was really struck by, and Stacy and I have talked about this because my teenage daughter, she wouldn't mind me sharing this, she developed OCD during the pandemic. And the incidence of OCD in teens, you know, it's going to be something that we learn from. But I think the energy that teenagers, you know, generate about who am I and who am I trying to be and what am I trying to do in the world is meant to be done outward, right? With peers, they're meant to match their outfit to their friend's outfit and have a fight about who's allowed to wear that. You know, they're meant to bounce themselves off of their peers developmentally. And they couldn't do that, and so the energy stayed inside them. And, you know, just to share this piece of information, again, all the training, all the things, all the books, my daughter, who I was with all the time because we didn't go anywhere, I think it was probably 4. She was not able to read. My daughter's a huge reader. It's kind of all she does. And she wasn't reading. So I was noticing, why aren't you reading? Actually, I was nagging her, why aren't you reading, right? What's wrong with you? Why aren't you reading? And probably about 4 months later, she said, I want to tell you why I'm not reading. I'm counting in my head all the time, and I can't stop. I was like, wait a minute, what? And I felt it inside my body, and I was like, what else? And she said, well, I'm tapping, and I'm touching, and I have this rhythm that I have to watch. And Stacy and I know every single therapist in Washington, D.C., and they all owe us favors. And I could not get my daughter in to see. I mean, I called somebody and I was like, you and I buried a body once, and you owe me. I did. I called him, and actually, I started her on medicine first because it was easier, and because I knew enough to know that OCD is treated well with medicine. So, you know, it's not imaginary the stresses that we're seeing, and we kind of need all hands on deck. And there are hopeful pieces, like even just to go back to the death policy, there's an organization in DC called Evermore, which is working on policy. Joyelle Mulholland is, you know, she lost a child, she is lobbying, and the federal government just passed. It's not enough. I don't even want to tell you how many days the federal government gets for bereavement leave because it's horrifying, but there used to be none. So 3 days is better than nothing, and that policy just passed, and it took them 7 years to get it passed. You know, it's all too slow and it's not enough, but I think that in partnership with the intensity, you know, there's a new clinic that treats OCD in teens in downtown Bethesda because there's so much OCD in teens. So I think there is, you know, again, I always sort of say, like, I believe in capitalism, like people are going to make money off of this, the resources are going to show up. But I think part of it is changing the culture and being able to talk about this stuff. So one of the things when I experienced PTSD, Stacy and I had this moment with our friend Mary Beth in our supervision group, and Stacy said, what do you need to get back into the chair as a therapist? And I was like, I have to tell my clients what really happened. And part of that, and part of why I talk about it, you know, my brother was like, no one is ever going to come see you again if they know that you can't even manage your own mental health. I was like, boy, you don't understand how mental health works. But it was really important to me, for people to understand that you can know all the things, and I've read all the books, and I have the degrees. And that's not what these things are about. It's about embodying and experiencing. And the reason I talk about it is that I want to be able to change the culture. And part of the reason I listen to Lucy on her videos, you know, she says, you were saying it every day, like mental health is health. Health and mental health are the same. And I think it's I think it's not something that you hear from doctors. I think most people's experiences are much more, I went into the doctor, they didn't really listen, they didn't really give me examples, they didn't really give me help or hope. But it actually, it's just layers of an onion skin at this point. And what's going on in your couple is what's going on in your body, is what's going on with your kids. Systems are overlapping. And I really feel grateful for the work that both of you are doing.
Likewise.
And trying to, just support it.
Any other questions?
Just a comment on the bereavement leave. It's interesting also. It's like the affinity, like you get the bereavement leave if it's like, if it's your aunt or your uncle, but if it's like somebody you're living with or somebody very close friend, no, that doesn't count. So that's
insane.
Very narrowing.
I read a company's policy.
Makes your eyes roll.
The HR director gave it to me. This is a true story. And it was like, if it's a child, you get 5 days. If it's a foster child, you got like 1 day.
You're reading.
I expletives out of my mouth. I was like, how do you think this works? But their argument is there has to be something.
There has to be some law.
And I take argument with that, which is what if what we said was you got 50 days of bereavement leave. You got 70 weeks of bereavement leave. But you have to check in, and there has to be a system, and there has to be a connection, and we need to know how you're doing, and we're going to create a community. So rather than saying we're going to give you the least amount possible, we're going to give you the most possible. And we will incentivize you being able to come back in and work and co-create different teams and different supports. I mean, I've seen it work, so that's why I can espouse it. When I say it to people, they're like, that sounds terrible. But your option is to lose your employees. Yeah.
It reminds me of those water, like the sinks in the bathroom at the airport. That like you hit and it's a little water.
That's right.
It's gay people, they'd be like splashing and like bathing.
Right.
No,
We're not saving water this way.
Just one water.
We're just making people.
Just like finish getting the soap off. I think there's this fear that if we give people space to talk about, or to, not even to talk about, just to grieve.
Yeah.
That all of a sudden everyone's going to be falling apart. But actually, let's acknowledge this is part of the human condition. Like, this is a universal thing. We can actually better self-regulate if we have the support. And we're not going to take all the water out of the sink at the airport and run around and have water fights. We just want to wash our hands.
So what's remarkable is that there's a company that I worked with 2 years ago, and they had because of the population, what they did, they had a lot of people who were bereaved in the workplace. They were overseas, and what I said was, what if you just talk to them frankly? Do you need to leave the job? How can we help you find a job that will partner with the energy that you have right? And it was like a little bit of a fight until it wasn't, because they did care about their employees. And so that's what they would enter with. We sort of need you back in the chair. It was a call center. So they had like hours in the chair. We sort of need you back in the chair. But just be honest with us. If that is not possible, because you can't push your way through grief, not really. And they did. They hired someone to help those folks find jobs. And some of the jobs were just temporary jobs because they didn't have other jobs to offer them. And you know what? You know how beloved that company was? How even the people who weren't bereaved felt about this company? That was like the loyalty and the connection around being human.
Yeah.
All the work. Not a little bits of work.
Just want to say thank you for taking your time to be with us.
Thank you for having us. Yeah.
Continue the conversation.
Yeah.
Thanks for being
Thank you.
Absolutely. Take this home with me.